because Lama Zopa has passed away, and some of us don't know him, but we feel close, perhaps, some of us have known him for a while. So normally when we have death, we have incredible grief, we have loss, we don't know, many people just don't know what to do. They don't have a particular view, That's fine. If you're a devoted Christian, it'll give you some courage. It's the same here, But what's interesting is because of the reincarnation thing, it's like the instant all that happened, already totally focusing on the future. I mean, we have these 3 prayers written by lamas, begging the lama to return. And that's the energy behind everything here. All the prayers, all the practices is to remove our obstacles because, it's a dependent arising. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, not just sitting there from existing from his own side, is a dependent arising. So the cause for him to come back is him being needed to come back. And that's us, So our requesting and wanting is a very powerful part of it. So to start, why don't we just start first with our refuge, and we start with, we'll just do the one prayer of His Holiness, the long life prayer. We'll do 2 others, the swift prayer, and then we'll do 2 others after that. Have you got the prayer there? You can share on the screen.
Yes, Robina. Which ones do you want to do? I have the swift return prayer, and then I have
that's the one I want. That's the one I want, His Holiness's prayer. So we do refuge, and then we'll do that prayer to start.
Okay.
So first we perhaps you should offer a mandala, Billy.
Yep.
So the center offers a mandala requesting the Buddha for the teachings. So we think in our hearts, offering to them the Buddha all the marvelous things of the universe, requesting these teachings.
This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamnirya Tayam.
So now we can take refuge, the refuge prayer. So we're thinking, I want to say the first one in English, I'll say it a bit longer. The first 2 lines are reminding ourselves of our reliance on the Buddha, his teachings, and the spiritual community. And the second 2 lines are stating our motivation, our reason for doing this practice. So it's saying we are going to rely upon, until we're enlightened, we're going to rely upon the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And then by the virtuous karma we create by just listening to these teachings, may we become a Buddha, no matter how long it takes, in order to benefit all suffering sentient beings, just like Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Sangye Chodan Soke Chognam La Jancho Badu Dagni Kyapsu Chi Dagi Chernyan Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Penche Sangye Dropa Shog Sangye Chodan Soke Chognam La Jancho Badu Dagni Kyapsu Chi Dagi Chernyan Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Penche Sangye Dropa Shog. So now let's do that prayer for Rinpoche. His Holiness's prayer. Yeah, that's the one. So let's read the colophon first. It's very moving. This is Holiness said, I composed this swift return prayer at the request of the centers of the Foundation for the Preservation of the Mahayana Tradition in general, Kopan Ogmin Jangchub Churling, Kacha Gakil Ling Nunnery, and all the students of the late Rinpoche, headed by Roger Kunsang, who said that since the elucidator of the Buddha's teachings, the incomparable Zopa Rinpoche, had suddenly departed to peace, a swift return prayer was needed. I also composed it because of a special connection, exemplified, for instance, by the fact that when Rinpoche was with us, he would consult me on his projects, big or small. While it is devastating that Zopa Rinpoche has departed in this way, the most important thing is that when he was still with us, he made the precious mind of enlightenment, and of course that's bodhicitta, the foundation of his practice, and so on. If his followers who have been left behind properly emulate the Guru's life, it is exactly that which will definitely fulfill Rinpoche's wishes. Therefore, keep this in mind, and from now on also make requests to the 3 jewels and earnest dedication prayers. Composed by the Dalai Lama, a Dharma teacher and Shakya Bhikshu, on the 25th day of the 2nd month of the year of the water rabbit in the 17th Rajong cycle April 15, 2023. So we think we're listening to these teachings for exactly this reason. That's okay, we can put the prayers down now. Put the prayers down now. Finish the prayers now, that's it. Yeah. So we think we're going to listen to these teachings with that in mind, you know, and and we just use this whole experience to renew our wish to practice, to renew our reason, reminding ourselves why we're practicing, you know, it's like a wake-up call. This is the most powerful way to use anyone's death, the experience of anyone's death, but in this case, our mama. So like I said before, it's so good to be here. Just to be here one more week. Lots of people coming and going for the whole period, I think, up to the 49 days. They're doing all these practices. It's like 24 hours a day. So somehow it was very powerful. You really feel the weight of the power of this kind of amazing worldview held in the minds of these incredible Tibetans. You know? Okay, so what are we going to talk about this morning, Bill? What's the plan?
Well, the plan was to talk about wisdom today, Robina.
Okay. All right. Well, what's wisdom? Okay, what's wisdom? Well, a bird needs two wings, wisdom and compassion. And as His Holiness says, compassion is the point, but it's not enough. You need wisdom. And that really, thinking very simply, the wisdom wing is the teachings and practices that we share with the Hinayana path. It's, in other words, it's the first and middle scopes of the Lam Rim. It's all exactly the same teachings, and it's all encompassed in the Four Noble Truths. But so that's the essence of the wisdom wing. So what is wisdom? And when we understand this, we understand Buddha's teachings. You know, we understand the point of Buddha's practice. So wisdom, of course, the final wisdom that we are trying to achieve is the wisdom is the wisdom that causes us to be in sync with the ultimate reality of everything. That's when we cut the root of all suffering. So that's when we realize emptiness. But wisdom in general it's a simple word. It means being in touch with reality. Simply, if you think 1 + 1 is 3, you haven't got wisdom. You're stupid. You know, if you are thinking the 1 + 1 is 3, 2, that's wisdom. It's in sync with the reality of the system of mathematics. You know, so being in touch with reality is absolutely central point for the Buddha. And this is curious. Why would we think that? I mean, who would think that a spiritual path is learning how to get wisdom? You think you go and study maths or be a clever person. But this is the point. Buddha's telling us, this is the basis of all his teachings and all his practice. He's telling us that, you know, okay, one way of framing the whole Buddha's teachings is in terms of its being a method to stop ignorance and get wisdom. Another way of framing all of Buddha's teachings is it's a system for stopping suffering and getting happiness. Now that sounds more delicious to us. We might not be sure we want wisdom, but we all want happiness. But the interesting point is, for the Buddha, the method to get happy is to get wisdom. Why? Because right now he is saying, for his own direct experience, working on his own mind, he has discovered that the neuroses in the mind, the mind is driven by ego grasping, which believes in the intrinsic me. On the basis of this, there's attachment to get what that fantasy me wants. On the basis of that, so it's anger and aversion and upset when we don't get what we want, and all the other 84,000 ridiculous misconceptions in the mind. So Buddha's saying these misconceptions about how things exist are the cause of suffering. So therefore, the method is to quit suffering is to get wisdom. I mean, it's quite curious thinking this way because it's not immediately evident to us. Certainly not in the samsaric world. I mean, we all want happiness. And so, of course, we think being samsaric, which means being caught up in these delusions, we think that getting happiness means getting what attachment wants. And we spend our life doing that and avoiding what attachment doesn't want. That's the methodology of the world, dogs and monkeys and humans. And the Buddha says that's the very cause of suffering. You know, we're digging ourselves deeper every day into suffering by doing that. So, of course, his method to get the final wisdom, you don't just leap into that. That's so the compassion, the wisdom wing, if you completed just that, let's say you're on the Theravadan path in Burma or Thailand, you'd hear all those same teachings, just like we hear in the first and second scopes, about karma, first of all, the law of cause and effect, which is reality. That's one of the ways in which we don't have wisdom. We completely have no sense of cause and effect. We have completely no understanding of the law of karma. And this is, they say, one of the bases of the reasons why bodhisattvas have such compassion for us. Because we don't forget about not realizing emptiness. We don't even realize cause and effect. I mean, look at the world. Everybody, we all know we're suffering. Everybody thinks suffering is coming from out there. Every human being, every monkey, every ant, it's deeply ingrained in our mind. And this is the most painful, because every time we think you're the cause of my suffering, then blaming, I digging deeper my suffering, because I'm the cause of my suffering. I'm the cause of my happiness as well. This is the whole law of karma. Like His Holiness says, it's like it's like self-creation. So the first level of practice in getting the wisdom wing is you control your body, speech, and mind. You live according to good ethics, which is the basis of all the practice too. So you stop creating your future suffering by stopping harming others. Then you get to the next scope, and now you get real renunciation. You give up attachment. And then if you were on just the wisdom path, you would then get shamatha. You'd study this, you'd train in this brilliant technique invented by these Indians more than 3,000 years ago. They created it. They're the ones who began the investigation to the nature of self and discover the nature of the mind. I mean, incredible beings. So, you then get shamatha, and then you would realize emptiness, and you get the final wisdom. And then you've achieved your nirvana. You're out of here, baby. You don't need to come back. You're finished. But if you're on the compassion wing, you continue. But the whole wisdom wing is how to get wisdom. But what's interesting in the Mahayana path, the way the Lam Rim is presented, the way Lama Tsongkhapa presents the Lam Rim, we do the first scope, which is abiding by the laws of karma, which we talked about. We go to the second scope, we start to dig deep into the mind and get to the root of the problem, which is the delusions, and get renunciation, in particular of attachment. Because even though ego grasping is the root delusion, effectively for the Four Noble Truths, attachment's the main cause of suffering. It's the cause of this planet. The first place, it's the cause of having a body of the five senses. It's the cause of all the suffering we have, this attachment. This is huge to give up. And so emptiness belongs there. Emptiness is a Hinayana teaching. Emptiness is not a Mahayana teaching in its nature, because the Hinayana Arhants have achieved nirvana by realizing emptiness. So it's right there in the path. But Tsongkhapa puts it at the end of the Mahayana path in the six perfections. After you have bodhicitta first, then you have the six perfections, and finally you have the teachings on emptiness. So it's taught in the context of the Mahayana path in the Lam Rim. And of course, there are the Mahayana interpretations of emptiness. There's many interpretations of emptiness, selflessness. And so the one we need to accomplish is the one that's taught in the Prasangika Madhyamika view, which is the way Lama Zopa Rinpoche teaches the whole time, of course. So that's what we're going to discuss. But the thing is, emptiness is we're all kind of very intelligent, and we love to squeeze our brains, as Lama Yesi says, and think about emptiness and think about these things. It's very exciting, and it's good to do that. But the whole point of the Lam Rim, it's like a series. It's like when we go to play tennis. You don't just leap into playing Wimbledon tennis. You learn your exercises. You learn to jog. You learn to get fit. You eat properly. You think, what's that got to do with tennis? Well, it's priming your body, getting it ready for you to be able to even hold a racket. It's a gradual path, and it's a curious phrase for us, Lam Rim, gradual path, but it's so logical. Everything we learn is presented in the framework of a gradual path. When you learn music, you learn all the scales and arpeggios. You're training your hands. It's an incredibly complicated system, and so it's taught step by step. Every good system is taught like that. Well, this is what this is too. So the very first level of practice, we have to learn to abide by the laws of karma, which is the first level of understanding of wisdom, to be in sync with the reality that everything exists according to the causes, and we are the main player in our causes. Our mind came from the past, imprinted with the different karmic seeds we planted by doing certain actions. Negative ones will ripen as our suffering, and positive ones will ripen as our happiness. This is the first level of wisdom to get, which is already difficult for us. And that already, by hearing about karma, already it begins to help us understand emptiness. But it's not explicit, though. You see, the main logic to prove emptiness, as Lama Yesi puts it, paraphrasing Tsongkhapa, the king of logics to prove emptiness, is dependent arising. And dependent arising, one of the three levels of dependent arising, which we're going to talk about, and a perfect example of the first level of dependent arising is karma, cause and effect. The very first level of dependent arising is that everything exists in terms of cause and effect. These are causes, so we know that when it comes to gardens and houses, we know the causes, and that's how we get a house. We learn all the correct causes, and your house will stand up when you build it. So here, the Buddha says, one of the biggest misconceptions we've got is about who I am and where I come from. And especially if we come from our culture, where it's either Christian or Jewish, the religious philosophies would posit a creator, right? Well, Buddha's view is so fundamentally different from that. It's hard for us to hear it. We just think it's like a hippie joke, reincarnation. Everybody laughs about it. But this view has been around for 3,000 years. It's held and it's taught extensively and vastly and deeply in all the literature. This is some hippie, ridiculous idea, which is what Western people think about it. It's so insulting. So cause and effect is the very first level, and already the explicit teaching in the first scope is to practice morality, is to practice good ethics and stop killing and stealing and lying. Why? Because that's the cause of your future suffering. And Buddha says this is the instruction to stop suffering, or stop causing it, honey. Stop harming others. The very first level. But the implicit teaching, as we learn to take on board karma, as we learn to gradually listen to it and think about it and apply it in our lives, not just leave it in the books. Already the difference in our personality is quite powerful. So if we take the view, we start with the typical view of being an ordinary samsaric person who believes that their mother made them, their father made them, that God made them, somebody else made them, and everyone else is the cause of their suffering and happiness, which is the view of a victim for the Buddha. But it's not reality, it's nonsense. He's not being rude if you have faith in the creator. That's better than, that's okay. You can have faith in the creator and do the creator's wishes. You'll learn to become happy. But the view that you sort of like this, the view of ego is really, Lama Yeshe would say to us, it's the self-pity me, the innocent victim. This is quite shocking to hear, but it's very powerful to understand it. And this gradually loosens this sense of not fair. I didn't ask to get born. It's not my fault. That's a prevailing view of ego. We feel it. No one needs to teach us that. But when you start to apply karma, that lessens, and we become more grown up. We become more accountable. We become more realizing that we are the source of our pain and our suffering and our happiness. So that we become less self-piteous. We become more courageous. And this is already just karma. First scope, already it loosens the grip of ego grasping. Already when we're lessening the sense of a self-existent me. It's not the explicit teaching, but it happens. So it's already priming our mind ready. Then we get to the middle scope and we start to learn about the delusions. And this is where we really become a Buddhist. We start to apply this unique view of the mind that Buddha has, what the mind is, how it functions. And that crucially means here we're trying to identify in general the delusions, specifically attachment, because this is the source of the suffering of change, this more subtle level of suffering. So again, the explicit teaching here is to see the suffering nature of attachment and anger, depression, pride, low self-esteem. And again, having the view of karma, not blaming other people for doing it to you and giving it to you, not my fault, but you take responsibility. You start to identify your mind. You start to identify this emotional hunger, your attachment, your anger, your jealousy, your depression. And you start to realize that they are the source of your pain. So we're focusing in the second scope on seeing the suffering that these delusions cause us. That's the explicit teaching. Implicitly, it's again helping us priming our mind to be able to understand emptiness. Why? Because that's when we realize the deluded character. There's a disturbing character of all the afflictions, which is evident. Check the last time you were depressed or jealous or anxious. You don't say, wow, I was jealous yesterday. It was so nice. We know it was unbelievably painful. So that's the main emphasis in the middle scope, to get in touch with the suffering nature of these delusions. But implicitly, we start to realize the deluded nature. This word delusions in English is a brilliant word that explains exactly how these unhappy states of mind function. And therefore, in general, all the states of mind that are the source of our pain, which are the misconceptions. So it's a surprise initially to hear that anger is a misconception. We don't get that. What are you talking about? She did punch me in the nose. You saw it. That's not a misconception. That's not the point. It's much more precise than that. When we start to look into these delusions, attachment and anger and the rest, we start to identify, and this is when we study low rig, we should be studying the mind. We learn at the bare bones of these states of mind, they are literally, I mean literally, misconceptions. So anger is defined as a conceptual state of mind that exaggerates the ugly qualities of the person, the thing, the event that you think is the cause of your suffering. Attachment is a conceptual state of mind that exaggerates the delicious qualities of something. The function of all these afflictions at this level is that they're all rooted the emotions of them are rooted in being misconceptions deep in the bones of our being that we have held and believed in for so long that they're just automatic. And we've held and believed in for so long these exaggerations, these distorted views of things, that even the things appear to us like that. So attachment is so intense, for example, and so ancient in our mind, that it's just coming from this emotional hunger that over-exaggerates the deliciousness of the cake and over-exaggerates the role of the cake in making me happy. It's completely inbuilt from countless lifetimes. So that habit is so strong that it causes the cake to appear the way we think it exists. This is how deep the mistakes are. So when we get into the middle scope and learn about the suffering nature of these delusions, we also begin to learn about how they're delusional, they're misconceptions. That's the implicit teaching. So that begins to prime our mind ready to now, when we get to the bodhisattva path and we get bodhicitta, and then we go to the 6 perfections, and then we do the 5th and 6th of those are shamatha and special insight. Calm abiding and special insight. That's where it's taught, where we now begin to understand. We're now ready to hear about dependent arising, for example, being the king of logics that proves emptiness. And what that means is that the delusion that's involved in grasping at an intrinsic me. There's a delusion of attachment that exaggerates the distance of the cake. There's a delusion of anger that exaggerates the ugliness of the boyfriend who cheated on you. These are the branch delusions, and they're rooted in the root delusion called ignorance. And the root ignorance is, we can say colloquially, is ego grasping. It's a misconception. It is too a misconception, but the deepest misconception. And it's a misconception about the very nature of your own I and everything else that exists. And so if attachment exaggerates the deliciousness of the cake, anger exaggerates the ugliness of the mean boyfriend, then ignorance exaggerates the very ontological status itself of everything that exists and gives it a concrete, inherent, intrinsic character that it simply doesn't possess. Because this is the subtlest one, the most pervasive, the hardest to understand. Practicing the Lamrim properly leads us very beautifully, primes our mind to get us to be able to now start working on understanding this one. Are we communicating? Good. So this idea of the Buddhas, this approach of the Buddhas, this view of the Buddha is pretty unique to his view, that there are deluded states of mind, and the emotional ones, they call these the afflictions, the emotional afflictions, the very powerful ones, attachment and anger and jealousy and low self-esteem and arrogance. But there are many misconceptions. They're not the only ones. So there's a misconception of believing that someone created you. There's a misconception of believing that your mind is the brain. There's a misconception of thinking there's no karma. There's a misconception, there's so many misconceptions about reality. There's a misconception that believes that things are permanent, whereas they're impermanent. So one way of presenting the entirety of Buddha's views and Buddha's philosophy is learning to know what he is saying is delusional and what he is saying is fact, and getting our mind in touch with what is fact. That's wisdom, and that combined with bodhicitta is a Buddha. So understanding the ultimate way that things exist, the final way that things exist, understanding emptiness, is really excellent to do it in the framework of the two truths. There's many ways, logical arguments we can use. We need to practice to loosen the grip of ego grasping. But the king of logics, as I said, as Lama Yeshe puts it, is independent arising. So the two truths means there's different ways of talking about it, but here what it means is that everything that exists, and this is such a fundamental point to get clear, everything that does exist, implying there are things right now that we think exist that don't. So the cake that attachment sees on the plate doesn't exist. The cake that attachment sees doesn't exist. The ugly boyfriend that anger sees doesn't exist. These layer, as Lama Zopa says, the delusions decorate on top of what does exist, layers upon layers upon layers upon layers of qualities that just don't exist there. So it's a really subtle job, you know, of you see a mug, you see the cake. There is a cake on the plate. You are correct. It is a chocolate cake. You are correct. It does taste delicious. You are correct. But we can't see that the whole experience is completely suffused with lies. So to be able to extract from that view of the cake, the view that is accurate and the one that is not, that's the job. And that's the real job. And that's the hard job. And we have to take this view that there are these deluded, neurotic, ridiculous misconception states of mind, and there are valid, reasonable states of mind. This is quite unique to the Buddha's view. We have to learn that. If we can't learn that, we can't realize emptiness. If we can't learn that, we won't understand attachment. You know? So the two truths means everything that does exist has two ways of existing. There's the conventional way it exists, its conventional character. And then there's his ultimate character. And that same object has both. Everything that exists has both those. So we can talk about my telephone, my phone here, my iPhone, you know, I can talk about the self, I can talk about my glasses, I can talk about my iPad. Everything that does exist has these two different ways of existing simultaneously, the two truths. And it's a marvelous framework for realizing emptiness, because then it keeps us grounded and to not fall into the abyss of the great mistake of nihilism, as Lord Buddha says, as Tsongkhapa says. So what's it mean? Conventional. There's conventional reality, ultimate reality. So if Buddha's telling us that we're seeing things wrongly, everything that exists is being seen through the lenses of these mistakes, therefore we continue to suffer, then we need to know how to work out, what's the starting point? Well, you know, we have to first establish what does exist conventionally first. Then we can begin to investigate how it exists ultimately. So, you know, always the same example, my thermos. Here's my thermos. Let me have a mouthful of water, just a minute. It's 7:30 here now. They just finished puja and they're all going to breakfast soon. I'll have my breakfast later. It's sort of sunny day. It was raining for a few days. It was quite hot before that, but it's pleasant now. Moving towards the rainy season. And all the monasteries getting back to life again. All the monks are out there doing their debates and things. Every day at 4:30, a group of people goes up to Rinpoche's room where his holy body is, and it's like this mandala construction. And we do prayers for a couple of hours, you know. Okay, so, all right, so here's my thermos, right? So I'll look at that and I'll say, Mummy, what's that? And she will say, and what she will do is give its label, she will label it. She will say, it is called a thermos, sweetheart. So of course, I don't know what that means. So she has to give me a definition. So I'll say, Mummy, what is it? Very good question. What is it? It's quite a powerful question. What is it? Even what I'm asking is, what does it mean? The meaning of something. What is it? The meaning. What is it? She'll say she'll give me a definition. So roughly speaking, you could say a definition has two parts. The first part gives you its conventional character. And she will say, look at it. Can you see it's that flat-bottomed metal container? And I can see that. That's the first part of the definition. But listen to this. It doesn't tell me yet what it does. You can see it. It's very clear. What's that, Mummy? It's an iPhone. The first part of the definition is this oblong-shaped whatever. It doesn't tell you anything. The second part is the crucial piece. This tells you its function. It tells you what it is. It tells you its meaning. It tells you its job. And what is the thermos? The second part, its job, it keeps my tea hot. Now, don't believe her. We believe anything anyone tells us. She has to prove it. This is a really important point. No wonder we all go crazy in the world. We hear, I mean, endless conspiracy theories daily on the internet, and everybody will believe everything. We're all going mad. We don't question anything. We just believe what we're told. We're like infants. No wonder we're crazy. So she has to prove this. Well, that's pretty evident. So what she will do is put the tea in, she'll put the lid on, she'll leave it for several hours, we'll take the lid off later, and then we'll see the tea is hot. She just proved that it fits the definition of a thermos. This is vital. If we can even get conventional reality clear, we would all be blissful. The world would be a happy place, I tell you. Forget it, ultimate. I'm not even in touch with what exists conventionally. I mean, for example, Buddha's saying we're believing that our mind is our brain. I'm not insulting neuroscientists. The Buddha would say, no, it's a non-physical entity, a non-physical capacity for cognition that, yes, indeed, at the gross level does depend upon a brain, but is not a function of the brain. I remember reading, reading this book when I was editing Lama Zopa Rinpoche's book about death, how to face death without fear. And I remember reading this book by an American medical journalist called Nick Teresi, and he's a very funny fellow, and his expertise is death. He's in the medical profession. And it was a whole thing about what happens giving organs, in the organ industry. And he was quite cynical about it and quite heavy in some of his assessments of all the, whatever, it doesn't matter. But what was interesting was, there's all these, there's obviously now more and more contradiction and confusion among people in the medical profession about when death ends, when life ends, because people are coming back to life. It's been happening for centuries, but no, it's been in the too hard basket for the medicos. But now they have to confront it because you're ready to take out some guy's liver and he inconveniently comes back to life. What a drag, So all kinds of things are now causing conflict, and people are confused. When does life end? There's, for example, there's a whole chapter on people who have what they call out-of-body experiences, in particular on the operating table. So, of course, most people are cynical about it. No, this is ridiculous. People who report exactly what they saw and what they heard while they were unconscious on anaesthetic. But there was one example of one woman, he said, that was had to have such a radical procedure that she had to be, all her organs had to be stopped functioning, so she couldn't be conscious. From their point of view, there's no way in the universe she could be conscious. But he joked about how she reported the most vivid experience. So no one can argue with this. So what I'm getting at is this: one fellow in this business, in this industry, he said, I can now say with certainty that consciousness is not a function of the brain. I don't know what it is, but that I can say. So it's great that people are looking at this. So what I'm getting at here, Buddha's telling us we're living in a misconception. It's a misconception. He's not being rude. He gives all his evidence. So if we could just be in touch with what things are existing in conventional terms, karma, the mind, we'll all be happy people. The world will be a happy place. And like I'm saying with the Lam Rim, that prepares you to do that, but then it prepares you to finally get to the realization of how things actually exist, so that we can realize that and cut the root of all the suffering and get out of samsara. So you establish what is something is conventionally, but still not enough that she's proven that it does hold her to keep her tea hot. You now got to make sure there's no other definition of this type of thing in the world that you live in that contradicts that one. Then you can sign off and tick the box and shake hands and agree. Now we agree that is a thermos, that is an iPhone, that is a mind, that is this. It's powerful. It's powerful to do this. So that's establishing things existing conventionally. Now we're ready to establish its ultimate character, how it exists finally. Okay, so the two truths about that. So the first, so using the thermos, the conventional truth of the thermos, and so one way of describing that, you say what it is, and then we look at, and its conventional way of existing is, and one of the the shorthand for how things exist conventionally is dependent arising. Things exist in dependence upon various factors. This is the way of describing how things exist conventionally. Once you've established it's just its definition. It's a dependent arising. And there's three levels of dependent arising we can discuss here, each of which is a particular argument Buddha has with the views that prevailed before, which is where is upon those views that he diverged in his own direction. And that we now have Buddhism, because he came out of this brilliant Indian system, you know. So the very first level of dependent arising of the thermos, for example, is that it's the result of causes. Now, we're good at that in the world. We call it science. That's how come we build buildings and build amazing things. We really understand the laws of cause and effect when it comes to creating things, physical things. We're geniuses, mental concepts as well, like physics or something, you know. So this thermos is the result of causes. So it's obvious if you want to produce another thermos, you need to know the causes, and you'll get a thermos. It's pretty clear. So let's look at the person. Let's look at the phenomenon called I, person, self, me. They're all synonyms. They all refer to this type of phenomenon, or the phenomena sitting there, Bill and the other people in the Gompa and you people on the Zoom. We are all an example of the type of phenomenon called person, self, I, me. That's the label is referring to us. I forget the definition of a person. I can't think what it is. One that creates karma or something. I can't remember. Anyway, so we're one of those. So let's look at how these phenomena exist. Let's look at this. Well, you know, so it's pretty, the first level of dependent arising of I is karma, cause and effect. That I, this person, is the product of various causes all coming together that produce a person. This karma, that's why I said before, karma is a brilliant example to loosen the grip of this sense of a self-pity, sad me, you know, concrete, solid, innocent victim. Cause and effect, a good example. Now, the second one, which we're going to discuss, this is the one we really employ. This is the one talked about in the Lam Rim. In Pavon talks about, you know, before the 4-point analysis. The 4-point analysis. So the very first okay. So we're taking the person as the example of the type of phenomenon we're discussing here. The second level at which phenomena exist as dependent arisings is in terms of their parts, their bits and pieces. A thermos, we know a thermos is made of various bits and pieces. We know that. So the way of putting this is that thermos exists in dependence upon its parts. And this is the point. And that once you start to do the analysis, looking for the inherent thermos, the intrinsic thermos, that somehow we believe instinctively exists there without analysis. When we start to do the analysis, we will find that thermos, there is no thermos among those parts. That thermos is nothing other than, this is the final one, the third one, in terms of label, is the name given referring to those parts. But so when it comes to the self, that's when it's powerful. So we use the self as the example. So first, I, self, person, comes into existence in dependence upon causes. That's first scope, karma, pretty powerful. Second, I exists in dependence upon all the bits and pieces. So you could say the 5 aggregates, you could do whatever way you'd like to present, you know. But if you think about it, there are thousands of bits and pieces, aren't there, that have to all come together to produce a valid person. You can't get a thermos if you don't put all the bits and pieces together. You won't get a flower if you don't get all the correct bits and pieces together. Well, a person the same. So speaking simply, we're made up of body and mind, aren't we? This is the Buddha's view. Mind is one thing, not the brain, that's physical. Consciousness, mind, conjoined with the physical. These two together are the parts that make up a phenomenon called a person. So Buddha's saying that we believe primordially, instinctively, totally, and have for countless lifetimes. We believe at this level, of this mistake, there's levels of this mistake, that there is in here, among these parts, a very special part called I. Our language expresses that. The words we use. I, this is one of the main arguments. We say, I have a nose. And that's a conventional truth. Without analysis, that's a truth. You see on my face, and you'll see a nose there. You'll see this person, Robina, has a nose. Fact, is true, without analysis. But already there's a mistake in there, total mistake. This is the argument we have to use, one of the logical arguments we have to use. They talk about this particular argument is called one or many. But if everything, whatever exists, there's one thing or there's more than one. So this sounds so peculiar, but you listen. And it takes time to hear this one. I will give you a statement. I will tell you, my iPad screen is skinny, I can't do much. I'll tell you, I'll make a statement. I will say a statement now. I have a mala and a thermos. Now, looking with your eyes onto the screen, you hear the sound coming from my little square here, and you will see here Robina saying, I have a mala and a thermos. And you will quickly deduce it's true. Why? Because you know the meaning of a thermos, you know the meaning of a mala, and you know the meaning of Robina, simply speaking. So you will agree with that. She didn't lie. She's not saying, if she said, I had an elephant in my right hand, you're feeling sorry for me. So conventionally speaking, it is a truth, but we have to analyze that exact statement. This is one of the brilliant arguments to make. Okay, let's do it. So the way I like to say it is, that everything exists is a noun. We can say it's a noun, isn't it? A noun. So here, I just made a statement, and there were 3 nouns in my statement, weren't there? Well, okay, there's a pronoun. 3 nouns, would you agree? 3 things were mentioned. 3 phenomena were mentioned. I is one phenomenon. I said that noun, I, and then I said mala, and then I said thermos. Now that's 3 phenomena, isn't it? Now that's pretty easy to prove, because you can easily, and this is the point, if that's a valid statement just conventionally, you have to be able to point out each of those phenomena as being something, in this case, very simple, separate and independent of each other. And you can do that easily. The thermos could break, Robina is still intact, and the mala still works. The mala can break, the thermos still keeps my tea warm, and Robina is still existing. Robina can drop dead, and the mala and the thermos are not touched. That very simply shows there are 3 independent, separate phenomena. Pretty straightforward. Now we'll get slightly more subtle. And we will say, I have a nose and an ear. Now, again, without argument, that's a fact. Look, you can point ear, nose. Easy, but let's go deeper. We stated, like before, 3 nouns, 3 things. And that means you have to point out, like before, 3 separate phenomena, each of which doesn't depend on the other. Well, my ear, to do its job of listening, doesn't need a nose. My nose can be blocked, cut off. My ear still works fine. My nose to function, to breathe, doesn't need an ear. I can be deaf. That's easy. So the ear is not the nose, and the nose is not the ear, and they exist, simply speaking, independently. They're independent, simply speaking. That's 2 phenomena. So where's the third one? The eye, that doesn't depend upon the nose and the ear. Buddha's telling us very simply, you won't find one. But we believe there is one, utterly and completely. It's the basis of all our emotions, all our fears, all our suffering. The word I is the central player in our life. And so this is the point too. When we say a word, It has to refer to something that exists. This is the point. This is conventional reality. You say a word, it has to be in sync with something. This is very powerful. I'll say the word lid. Lid. Same as thermos. You have to know the name, the definition, and you have to point to what it refers to. There has to be a referent object of that word. So in terms of those the mala, the thermos, and the Robina, there are three separate phenomena, and you can point to each one in the group of three and say each of them is that phenomenon. There's Robina, there's a thermos, and there's a mug. Speaking simply, and there's a mala. Here, it's more tricky, isn't it? It's not so simple. But we believe in here, among all these parts, as my friend Pende says, walking hand in hand with the ear, the nose, the teeth, the mouth, the chin, and the other thousands of parts that make up the person called Robina. We believe there is a very special part walking hand in hand with all the others called I. So one of the arguments is this: if in the same way that the mala and the thermos are separate, and when the mala breaks, the thermos is looking on and saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry, poor mala," but it doesn't help, doesn't worry me. The thermos is still intact. Then, if it were true, and the same, the ear, if that breaks, and the nose is kind of, "Oh, poor ear, but I can still breathe. I'm okay. I'm not kidding. You know, listen." They're not touched by each other because they're separate. They're independent. So if there were an I that's kind of like the owner, the boss, which is how we think about it, if there were this special piece that you can point to that is separate from, independent of the nose and the ear, then when you say, "Robina, I think your nose is so ugly," and I will naturally say to you, "How dare you insult me?" And you will accurately say, "Robina, I didn't insult you. I insulted the nose." And then the nose will be thinking, "Oh, the poor eye, it's just been insulted. Thank God they didn't, you know," or the eye. No, if there is an eye that's separate, the eye will be looking on and go, "Oh, poor nose, just got insulted." No, because we believe two things. Either we believe there is a piece called I that's in there along with the nose and the ear doing its job, or the other mistake we make is that the whole of me is I. And every way we talk in everyday life expresses either one of these lies. So we have to do the unpacking. We have to do the analysis. Because Buddha's telling us there isn't a piece called I in there alongside the other pieces. He says there isn't one. He's proven that, but it's not enough just to believe him. We have to do the analysis and prove it for ourselves. And this is what takes time. So this is where the 4-point analysis comes in. This is where it's quite complicated, you know. It's difficult. The 4-point analysis would say, basically the 4-point analysis is if it's true, Buddha's telling us the starting point of the 4-point analysis is at least taking it as a hypothesis that there isn't an independent separate I. And we're trying to prove it. So the first step is, if you think there is an independent I in there, which we do, you first have to establish, the first point is you have to establish exactly what it is, how it appears to you, so that you can then begin to identify how it does exist. And that's the tricky part. That's the first one. Once we got that down, as Lama Yeshe says in Mahamudra, once you recognize the object to be negated, you already realize it doesn't exist. So that's the hardest job. That's the most difficult job. Are we communicating so far? Any questions before I continue? I need some questions now. Questions, Bill, before we continue.
Looking
in the chat.
Vince has a question, Robina.
Who does?
Vince.
Vince, good Vince, talk to me.
Hi, Robina. Thank you for teaching tonight. My question is, I was trying, could you talk about the different scopes of material you were talking about, and how it relates to the stages of the path, sort of kind of like where they fit.
I don't understand your question, Vincent. Say it again.
You're describing three different, like, I missed the second teaching, so that might be part of it, but you were talking about karma and delusions and ethics and bodhicitta and emptiness, and did those concepts fit into the framework of the?
Yeah, but that's what I explained already. That's what I just said this morning. Just now I said all that. Obviously I mustn't have said it clearly enough for you. That's what I said. I referred to all that right now. I just did that, yes, and I'll say it again.
Okay.
The very first scope, the lowest scope of the teachings is the essence of it is abiding by the laws of karma, practicing good ethics. Why? Because that's the method for stopping your future suffering. That's the method for stopping the grossest level of suffering, which is the suffering of suffering. That's the whole, because Buddha says suffering, gross suffering, being harmed by others is the source, is the result of harming others. So the very first level of practice is don't harm others, control your body and speech, have good behavior, live in vows. So it's within that, the essence of the first scope is that one. That's the essence of the practice of the first scope, is to behave nicely, control your body and speech so that you don't have future suffering. Then that subdues you enough to get to the middle scope, where you now get to the main cause of suffering, which is your delusions. So that's where you start to look into the second, more subtle level of suffering, which is the suffering of change, the main source of which is attachment. So in general, in the middle scope, you really start to become your own therapist. You really start to become a Buddhist by understanding the Buddhist view of the mind and identifying attachment and wanting to give it up. That's the wisdom wing. If you completed that as a Hinayana practitioner, you would then do shamatha, get calm abiding, and then you'd realize emptiness. That's in the outer samsara. We're on the Mahayana path here. So then the second one is you really begin to get renunciation of suffering and its causes. Now you go to the compassion wing, which is the Mahayana component, which is the great scope. And you do all the practices to accomplish bodhicitta. And then the final stages of the Mahayana are the perfection, the six perfections. The bodhisattva, having accomplished bodhicitta, bops along from life to life to life, accumulating masses of merit in relation to sentient beings by practicing the perfections of morality, generosity, patience, and perseverance. And then the last two, that's in their relationship with others, and in their meditation, they do the last two, which is get shamatha, calm abiding, and then on the basis of that, listen to all the teachings about emptiness, dependent arising, and realize emptiness. That's the essence of the Lamrim. Is that clear, Vincent?
Yeah, that helps. I wasn't understanding how karma and the ethical component and delusion led to renunciation. So thank you.
Can you see now?
Yeah. I'm just trying to fit all these things to try and make sense of them as a whole. So thanks.
Well, that's the point, yeah. But is it making a bit of sense now, what I've just said?
Yeah.
Okay, good, great. Any questions about what I said so far about emptiness? Anything? No questions about that? We'll continue then. Yeah, some question?
I have one.
Hello, Ruth. Hello, darling. Yeah.
Oh, can you hear me? You just froze.
What, sweetheart?
So someone told me one time that one way to think about emptiness, wisdom and emptiness, is in recognizing that there is what they said, two elements: impermanence and interdependence, as a way to view reality, right? Emptiness as reality. I don't know if I'm making sense right now. Anyway, so if I'm looking at interdependence, what you just described fits really nicely in my mind with a description of interdependence. Like, I am composed of these many different parts.
So what's the question, Ruth?
Yeah, I'm trying to get to it. So your the 4-point analysis, is that just a description of interdependence? Or
It's not a question, not like that at all. No, it's not
okay,
like that.
okay.
I'm
Okay.
talking about interdependence. Dependent arising is another term for interdependence. But yes, indeed, impermanence is one way that things exist, but that's not related to emptiness. That's a grosser level and a necessary level to understand, which we get back way earlier when we start to realize impermanence in the Lam rim. So impermanence is definitely one of the ways that things exist, but it's much grosser way, a much grosser understanding than the understanding of dependent arising, which is much subtler. That's the first
Okay.
point. You don't equate them. So here we're discussing dependent arising.
Okay.
And yes, dependent arising is that things exist. There are different levels of dependent arising. So it's the first one, karma, cause and effect, is an example of dependent arising. That a flower is the result of causes. Would you agree with that?
Mhm.
So things existing in dependence upon causes is the very first level of dependent arising. Very first. So a person is existing in dependence upon parts. This is the second level, So here we're discussing that one very specifically, that person, thermos, phone, table are the names of phenomena that at the second level of dependent arising exist independently upon their parts, and that you won't find a thermos and a table, a person among the parts. That's the gross mistake we make, and that's the analysis we're doing here.
Okay, and so that the purpose of that insight or realization, would you say, Robina, is to loosen our attachment to ourself? Is that the sort of
No, it's to realize
goal?
the emptiness of self, to finally cut the samsara. We're loosening the attachment to self back in the middle stroke when we start to look at attachment. We
Okay.
start to loosen the grip of self when we start to look at karma. Here, it's a much more subtle one. The reason to think about dependent arising of self is to give up altogether the belief in a fantasy self. It's the subtlest one. We're trying to see how it's a complete misconception, that self is made up, that it's got no intrinsic nature whatsoever. It's the subtlest thing we're trying to do.
Okay.
Not just give up attachment. Come slowly, darling. So, okay, let's just do an analysis then to try to prove. You see, the Buddha's saying, Ruth, we all suffer because we believe that everything has an intrinsic nature. So that realizing emptiness is what cuts that one, and then you're out of samsara. Then you finally have achieved your nirvana. That we have to do. Buddha says we've had countless lifetimes. We probably realized, we probably had given up attachment countless lifetimes. We realized karma countless lifetimes. We've had shamatha countless lifetimes. But we haven't used our subtle mind to realize emptiness. We haven't cut the root of samsara. So, but to cut the root of samsara is to realize the emptiness, the non-self-existence of the I. And that's what we're discussing here. So I know we've done this before, but for me, a really nice example, a way of looking into how there is no piece called I among these parts is to use the IKEA example. The typical analysis here, because here's an I fully constructed, there's an I fully constructed, isn't there? You've got a body, your mind, all the bits are doing their job. All the bits that make up I are doing their job, right? The bits of the hand do their job. The bits of your mind do their job. The bits of the mind do their job to cause you suffering. Some bits of your mind do their job to cause you happiness. Your nose does its job of causing you to breathe. The ear listens, the eyes see. All the bits and pieces of the person make up the person, do their job nicely. And if you think about it, and this is a really good point too, if you think about it, if it's going to be a proper functioning thermos, the parts all have to be clearly identified. And you can't add any extra little bells and whistles. You don't need extra bells and whistles. You need to know the nature of a thermos so you can construct it accurately with each piece doing its job. This is a really important point. So what we are doing is adding bells and whistles to everything. And they're part, and we've exaggerated. We know there's an eye, an ear, and a nose, and a foot, and a toe, and we're good at all that. But we've added an extra piece, another bell and whistle that doesn't exist there. This pointable, findable, independent, special little piece called I with shiny capital letters and written in gold. That's a bell and whistle that we've added. It doesn't have, and so if you analyze even this one way of analyzing, like use the IKEA. So at the moment, the product is there, completely constructed Robina. But if you go to IKEA, you'll be at a bit of shock. They give you a box, not full of a fully developed Robina. They're going to have to you've got to construct your own Robina, right? It's a really good analysis. You listen to this. So naturally, we're going to believe, as you start constructing the Robina, all the bits and pieces, right? Put the nose in the right place, the ear. And this is a really important point. You're putting the pieces together to build the person. You're putting the pieces together to build the table. When it comes to the person, you know, as you put the bits together, you keep hoping to find, wondering where the piece called I is, that we believe there won't be a functioning Robina unless it's there. It's like it's somewhere in the middle, it's a heart here, maybe. If we think about it, we say I, it's somewhere in here. And because we say I, there has to be a thing that it refers to. And we think there's a piece in there that belongs somewhere between the two breasts, maybe. And we don't know quite where the eye goes. So we've got to analyze each single piece. You've got to put the eye that sees things. You've got to put the ear together. There's a really good analysis. And each part has to play a role. So if you want to have 3 arms, that's fine. You have to build a new kind of person. But most persons have 2. You can handle 1, that's okay. But so you've got to put each of the pieces together. And it's very precise. You put the pieces together and each does their job. They've all got a job, and if they're all working nicely, everything works interdependently, and Robina will function beautifully. But we are believing, as you keep putting together, you're getting anxious because you think maybe IKEA's left out the eye, and you ring them up in a panic. Where's the eye? Well, they've discovered you don't need one. Why? Because actually, the parts do beautifully functioning as the eye. And finally, I is merely a name you give to those functioning parts. But you don't need an extra piece called I. That's what they mean by a soul. That's what they mean by a creator. It's an added bell and whistle. We don't need creating. We don't need a boss of the universe to run the universe and to punish and reward. And we don't need a little I in here to run the show. The parts do fine working on their own to function as Robina, as a thermos. You won't find an intrinsic, extra, independent little kind of boss person in there, which is how we feel. It sounds kind of simple words, but it's kind of a revolutionary realization when we can get it. You know? Because Buddha says all suffering, all samsara, all the realms of existence, all the countless eons of sentient beings are all the result of this belief, this primordial ignorance that over-exaggerates the very ontological status of the I and everything else. One day, in single-pointed concentration, the penny will drop. After all the work of the lamb rims, versus abiding by the laws of karma, controlling your body and speech, giving up harming others, the middle scope, giving up attachment and all the delusions and getting renunciation, going to the great next scope, getting body teacher, this outrageous, a main paradigm shift in your mind that only wants to benefit others, practicing all the 6 perfections, bopping along the world, benefiting others, and in your meditation, realizing emptiness. And one day the penny will drop. In the subtlest meditation, you've got to have calm abiding to get this. And after all the years and years and lifetimes of work and hard work and analysis and work and dependent arising and purification, one day the penny will drop. And you will see nakedly that there never has been, isn't, and never could be an independent I, an I that's independent of the parts. That's the direct realization of emptiness. And from that second, you can't fall back. You can only move forward. You've cut the root of suffering. You've got more to do, but you've cut the root. And once you cut the root, you're okay. So are there any questions? What time is it? 8:23.
About 20 minutes. Robina, thank you. That the IKEA example was great. I'm wondering how to do a better job of practicing. And
I don't know what you mean by that statement, Bill. You're a practitioner and you ask that question, it's embarrassing. What do you mean by that, Bill? You know the answer perfectly. So why do you ask?
I am asking, there are two main techniques that I know of to work on meditating on emptiness. And one is the dependent arising analysis, which we talked about. And the other is the 4-point analysis.
No,
And
they're totally related. They're completely connected. They're not separate.
well,
You apply that teaching in the 4-point now. But listen, Bill, what's your question, please?
my question is how do we keep those fresh? Like, how do we keep the 4-point analysis fresh? Like, how did meditators, like, I know I need to do this meditation repeatedly, the 4-point analysis.
Bill, the answer, if the very first point of the 4-point analysis is to identify precisely what it is that we think the I is. So we can't do that, Bill, if we don't know about the Buddhist view of the mind. We can't do that if we don't understand karma. So that's the answer. The broader answer is the more you practice all the stages of the path, the more each logically leads to the next. We can't isolate. It's like we're trying to isolate physics from having studied math. It's all part of the path. And the more you practice Lamrim, the more you practice living in your vows, the more you understand karma, the more you work on renunciation, that is what prepares your mind when you do get to the 4 points. And the more you know that study the mind, to know what a delusion is, know what a virtue is, know what the mind itself is, then we can begin to identify what we think. We even know what it means. When you look into your mind, how does the I exist? You can't say those words without knowing what you're talking about. It means you have to just keep practicing, keep studying. That's all. And every second in your daily life, every time you grab the I, every time fear arises, upset arises, you're going to grab it and go, where is it? You're going to notice it in your mind. That's what you have to do. So that the answer is keep practicing, keep studying every second. That's the answer.
So,
and
like,
learn the definitions.
So am I correct in saying that focus more on the stages of the path and less on?
I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
Okay.
I didn't say that. If we don't know, if you don't know enough about math and all the different things that precede physics, then you can squeeze your brain till the cows come home. I'm not saying either one or the other. They're both integrated. They have to be integrated. The more, you could even argue, Bill, this is what Lams always say, we have to purify. So that doesn't make any sense to us. You sort of, it's like, my example is like this. The point, if I go to Roger Federer, the point is to play tennis. I want to pick up a racket and I want him to show me how to play a backhand. But if he looks at me, he will see I'm 20, 30 pounds overweight. I don't even know what a racket is. I don't know what my left hand is or my right hand. So he will answer me when I say, please show me how to play tennis. Please show me how to realize emptiness. He will say, Robina, I want you to go off and do jogging for 6 months and lose 20 pounds and go to this and learn that. And I'll say, no, Roger, I want to learn how to play tennis. And he'll repeat his answer. Are you hearing my point? So every time I do a bit more jogging and I do a bit more clarity about left and right, oh, now I see the left hand is this one, the right hand is that one. It enables me to then pick up a racket. It's implicit. Like I said about karma, the explicit one is behavior and good ethics. Implicit one from karma is you learn to loosen the grip of ego grasping. You can't realize emptiness if you haven't learned to loosen the grip. And by practicing karma, which is explicitly behavior, but implicitly it loosens the grip. That already is enabling you to understand emptiness. That's what I'm getting at. It's integrated. That's what I'm getting at. Do you understand?
Yes.
Every time you purify, you move a bit of shit out of your mind that enables you to go, oh, no, I get that point. You didn't attack the point directly, but by purifying, it enables you to hear the point. That's the way the path works. It's very integrated, very organic.
So trying to do anything independently is like putting a square peg into a round hole. It's not
gonna right. You're bashing your head against a brick wall,
Yeah, okay. Thank you, I understand.
Thank you, good. Anybody else, darlings? I think we have to finish a bit earlier today, and I think next week could be a problem because that's the day I fly. I have to go to the airport that morning because for me this is the morning, and I have to go to the airport. So it might be easier if we can cancel next week and have the week after. Can you look at your calendar?
You want to postpone it? I think
better because it'll be really tight for the airport for me. So let's do the following day. The following week I'll be available then, if that's okay with everybody. Then we can continue.
I'm not sure I will be available, Robina, but I will make sure that everything goes smoothly.
Good.
if I'm-
Okay, fantastic. That's great. So what other questions? This is just touching. We just said a few things now. I mean, you know, when you're really doing this, just you go deeply into all of this. Just one little baby example I used, you know, one little baby example. So one mistake we make, like I said, we believe there is an I that's separate from the parts. And the other mistake we make is that we believe the I is oneness with the parts. And both of these need clear, logical arguments to break them because they're both fantasies. So, as Lama Zopa says, the label I cannot be the base, which is the parts. But that's the other mistake that we believe. So why not? This is the biggest mistake. We say I am Robina. So we mean equivalent. We mean it's equivalent that the I is Robina. So how can the base not be the label? How can the label not be the base? Well, if you say, okay, straight away, we say I have a nose. We say I, as an owner, has a nose. But then you say, the next one is, but it's all I. The nose is I, the ear is I, the mouth is I, all of me is I, will say. Well, if that's true, then you're saying I equals nose, I equals ear. Therefore, you're saying I have an eye, or nose has a nose. It's completely absurd. It's redundant. It's silly. I mean, it sort of seems like silly to talk this way, but it's completely logical. And so the 4-point analysis attacks both of these. The very first thing is to establish what we think the I is, how it appears to us in our mind, which is the subtlest. Then you establish the parameters of the search. One is that you believe there's an I that's independent of the parts. And the next one is you believe the I is oneness with the parts. And you have to do these analyses to prove both are wrong. This is the point. I mean, it needs extensive background and analysis and understanding and words and the meaning of what the mind is and the delusions. That's all the background. It's all the part that you learn in the labyrinth. And you don't even do enough in the labyrinth of all this. You just study the texts more to get your head around these 4-point analysis, you know. And then to do the logic, to do the analysis clearly. And then the conclusion is that you can be certain after the analysis that there is no I that's oneness with the parts, and that there is no I that is separate from the parts. And why? So this is the thing too, because we think of this stuff as very kind of ethereal and mystical and spiritual. No, it needs incredible logic. This is the thing that's surprising to us, because the delusions are insanely illogical. And that's why we have to have concentration. We have to have single point of concentration, because the level of mind and conceptuality that we have now, that we live at in day-to-day life, is just not powerful enough to cut the root. As Lama says in his Mahamudra book, you cannot possibly realize emptiness until you've achieved shamatha, because the mind isn't powerful enough. Conceptuality is just not strong enough. But we start with conceptuality, because that's where we are, you know. We start with conceptuality. So I think that'll do us for now. Okay, you people? And we finish with the other two swift return prayers for lovers of Rinpoche, please, on the screen. The prayer by Jada Rinpoche and the prayer by Kandala. Okay, Jada Rinpoche, this is the one. Next one. Next one. Just go to the top first, please. Go to the top. Let me see, what is this one? No, so we do the next one. We did this before. We do now the next prayer. Jada Rinpoche. Are you all saying these as a group, Bill? 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 Bill's not answering me.
Sorry, I'm muted.
Are you all saying these as a group at the center? You're doing these prayers as a group?
Yes. But this is the only one I have downloaded for today.
What do you mean the only one? There are 3 prayers. The latest booklet has got 3. You haven't been doing the Jada Rinpoche prayer?
I'm not
doing the Kandala prayer.
This is
I
the
think
one
they're in
that
that.
this is
Well,
the
I
one
think they're in that. Show me the booklet. Let me see it, please.
hang on.
We haven't got the latest one, so can you please keep in touch with the latest news, Bill?
I thought I looked at it right beforehand, Robina, so
Can you please show me the booklet?
I'm looking.
Just put it up on the screen, please.
I think this is the same one.
Keep going, please.
Yeah,
Keep going.
this one just ends at the 4th, so I must be looking at the wrong one, Robina.
Sorry to interrupt. I just added the link to the FPMT compilation with all three in the chat.
It's your responsibility, Bill, to have people have this. It's really, if you don't know, they can't know. It's really not good.
I'm sorry, Robina. I did make an effort, but I made a mistake.
No, you didn't make an effort. You didn't, Bill. Accept responsibility for your mistake.
Okay.
You didn't try hard enough.
Okay. I'm
It's your
sorry.
job. Yes, I'm going to so. Have you found it, please? You can download it, please, and put it on the screen. So everybody can have this themselves and do it in at their own time. So please, now the second prayer, go back, please. I can't see. Would you please go back to the heading? Thank you. This one. So now I have to make the screen bigger so we see. This is Jada Rinpoche, one of these marvelous lamas, who said recently, and I was with him in Italy just recently, he said that he first was 7 years old when he met Rinpoche, and Rinpoche was about 15. He said he was very impressed by this person. Even then, he said, he's so moved by him. So he wrote this prayer. Can you go up this, please kindly go up so I can see the prayer, Bill. Go down, whatever you want to say. Thank you. Now we start, read it, okay. So patient in bearing the hardships of spreading the teachings of the Muni in general and the teachings of the victorious Jamgon in hundreds of directions, Lord of Dharma, holding the three vows and wearing saffron robes, please quickly return as the glory of the peerless teachings. You held the teachings of explanation and practice with great asceticism, unable to bear that transmigratory beings are confused by the darkness of suffering. Through your great loving kindness, you skillfully led them to happiness. Unparalleled son of the teachings, please return quickly. Beautified by the ornament of supreme patience in increasing the practice of the supreme authentic teachings of the victorious one through listening, reflection, and meditation, guide of all transmigratory beings along the perfect path, true and perfect pure Guru, please return quickly. Please read the colophon. This request for a swift return of the sublime being, the supreme refuge, Thupten Zopa Rinpoche, who actualized the power of his bodhicitta prayers by spreading the teachings of the victorious one in general, and in particular the teachings of Jamgon, the second victorious one, to the furthest limit in all directions, was composed on the occasion of his having displayed the act of passing into peace, with the prayer that his profound, immaculate wishes be completely fulfilled, and that the youthful moon of his unmistaken reincarnation will be found with certainty. It was written by the one bearing the name Khensu Jado Tulku while staying at the Muni Jnana Dharma Center, which is Lama Zopa Center in Italy, on April 13, 2023. The next prayer, please. A lamenting wail, a supplication for the swift return of Kabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche by Drangjung Nel Dorma Kadro Seringma. Guru, think of me. Guru, consider me. Most precious root Guru, care for me. Most gracious root Guru, do not deprive us of your compassionate refuge. Listen and consider this heartfelt prayer made by a tormented disciple. Guru, embodiment of the Buddhas of the three times, please bless me. You may rest in all-pervading great bliss, equipoise within the dhatu of unimpeded luminosity, yet the playful dance of your loving compassion emanates in myriad ways. The time has come for the return of the swift appearance of your magical wisdom, the Rupakaya, and for you to care for us once again with your affectionate compassion. Arise, arise, arise from the Dharmakaya. I invoke you, I call upon you, I implore you on behalf of all beings. Do not rest in Kechara or other pure realms. Rather, to benefit the Buddha's teachings and all living beings, swiftly return to this southern continent to spread the Buddha Dharma and of study and realization. Quickly return to guide us poor wretched beings, such is the desperate cry of us, your disciples. Return so that we may actually behold your presence and receive the blessings of your body, speech, and mind. All violations, errors, mistakes, and broken samaya that we have made in relation to your body, speech, mind, and spontaneous activity through our being confused and conceiving things in erroneous ways, we confess within the luminous emptiness of your three kayas. Of everything auspicious, the supreme auspiciousness, may there be the auspiciousness of emptiness and compassion. May there be the auspiciousness of a timely meeting between master and disciples. Through the force of the truth of unchanging suchness, may the unmistaken incarnation return quickly. This lament was made by me, a Dakini with pure faith and samaya, her eyes filled with tears of sorrow. May these wishes of a beggar woman be fulfilled through the blessings of the deities of the three roots. Perception, its object, and the perceiver all dissolve within the expanse, the blissful clarity of suchness. So we dedicate this activity together, the seeds we planted, may we never give up practicing, when we have renewed energy from this passing away of Lama Rinpoche, to practice, to create the Courtin, to come back. So please, Bill, do your job and lead that for the people. It's your job, to find the right prayers, to be in touch, to share the news with everybody. Every day, FBMT is putting out news constantly, Bill. And if you don't do it, who will? It's your job. So please do it for people. Keep them informed, do regular prayers together on Zoom, and recite these prayers. Otherwise, the center in Missoula will not exist. Okay? Thank you. See you all in 2 weeks, sweethearts. Much love.
I will send out an email to you all. I am traveling in 2 weeks, so I'll have to watch the recording. Be sorry to miss it. But thank you all so much for everything and for keeping us going. It's been incredible. This has been a really incredible teaching for everybody here. And so I hope you can join us in 2 weeks. And thank you so much. Please keep making strong prayers for Lama Zopa's return. See ya.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
you guys. Bye.